Welcome back. We're looking forward to continue on page 246 where we left off. We're holding on the midah of Yesod, which is, as Hashem will learn today, the final two midas in the 7 midas presented here by the Alter Rebbe in detail and specificity, which we don't have any other Perek, as we mentioned. We don't have any other chapter in the entire Sefer Tanya Kaddish where the Alter Rebbe articulates the 7 midas and ultimately all the 10 svidas, which is including the Chochmah Bina Das, the 3 cognitive faculties which produce the 7 midas, as the Alter Rebbe makes it clear. At the very beginning of Tanya, the first segment, 3rd chapter, the 10 svidas, which is Chochmah Bina Das, and then the midas, which are the offspring, rather, of the Chochmah Bina Das. Now, the Alter Rebbe explained it. We did have this the last few weeks. We pointed this out. The Alter Rebbe begins the entire Sefer Tanya Kadisha with this idea. The 2nd chapter, Alter Rebbe begins with Nefesh Hashem is B'Yisrael, the 2nd soul, the Yid, what makes the Yid. The Yid, that he has a chelik, the Kamim Mal Mamsha, part of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And then 3rd chapter, he says, what's this part of the Kodesh Baruch Hu? What is it? Is it just a beam of light of infinite power and energy, which of course it is, because it's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Hashem is Ein Sof. But that begins the 3rd chapter. He says, no, beyond that, there's 10 spheres, which is an organized program, if you will, which exists as part and parcel of the Nefesh Elikis, the godly soul, and therefore it could intellectualize the matters of godliness, as Chochmah Bina Das, its cognitive faculties, and that produces the Ava, the Chesed, Gvura, the 7 midas, starting from Ava, Yira, which would be Chesed and Gvura, of course, love and fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there he says, quite briefly, what about the other midas? The other midas are anofim, they're branches. These are the chief midas, and the others are branches, which you learn more about these midas, you realize why they're branches of the Ava, Yira, branches of the Chesed and Gvura, that is. So, we learn from then. Even here, we're holding on the 4th segment. We mentioned so many times, Tanya has 5 segments in total, corresponding, for that matter, to the Chamishi Chumshei Torah. Meaning to say, what do I mean, corresponding to Chamishi Chumshei Torah? It's not that every segment you can directly find the correlation between the first segment corresponding to Bereshis and the second to Shmais and so on. No, it's brought out a number of places that the 5 segments within Tanya are with precision, because this is the Torah Shebiksav of Torah Achsidus, known to be the Torah Shebiksav of Torah Achsidus. Thus the 5. So we're holding the 4th segment, the 15th chapter in the 4th segment. Throughout the entire Tanya, despite Alter Rebbe speaks about all these midas in so many ways, in so many times, in different times, yet Alter Rebbe never explained us with an organized presentation what are all these midas are about, how do they function, and namely, how do they function in the relationship of a Yid to his Creator, to Hashem. In this chapter, the Alter Rebbe does. And he does it with a lot of detail and elaboration. For that matter, it begins with a mashal, with a parable, how it exists in the relationship of a master and a student. And from there, he also, with much expansiveness, even on the mashal, even on the parable. And then from there he crosses over, again with much detail, into the nimshal, to the message, which is the Yid with his Creator. So there's no other chapter like this, for that matter. It's not formally a geras, a letter, one of the epistles of the Alter Rebbe, which this segment is called the Geras HaKodesh, which is the holy epistles of the Alter Rebbe, a very distinct segment, indeed, very different, very distinct in the previous segments. We had a whole presentation of this on the 10th Igeres HaKodesh, which is again 5 back, so we don't have to go into it at this time. And it was quite, again, an elaborate presentation there. Besides the Igeres HaKodesh, its distinctness over the previous segments. On the overall, it has a backdrop. In what context did Alter Rebbe write these Igeres HaKodesh? We mentioned then there was it's associated with the famous Aliyah. Most of these Igeres, not all of them, but most of them, there is the common thread, which is namely or significant majority of these Igeres speak about the mitzvah of tzedakah. And again, the overall backdrop was associated with the Aliyah, famous Aliyah, but Mendel Haradokir, to Eretz Yisrael. Went through a difficult time. Again, not to repeat, we had a full presentation at the beginning of 10. Where do you find it? Well, if you follow wherever you're following, but on the original website, which is Tanya Online, oneword.com, TanyaOnline.com, you have this all lined up. All the previous classes lined up on the left side of the screen. There's an advantage also. There's a separate scroll bar if you want to follow the present class. Irrelevant, wherever you're watching this, wherever you're learning Tanya in general. But this site is set up in a way that all the previous classes are lined up from the very beginning of the first segment. We get it from Kuti Amarim, and it's really a click away. It's so easy to access. 10, beginning of 10, you want to know the backdrop, a bit of a Geras HaKodesh. It's very extremely easy to access, literally a click away. So we went through all the midas. Actually, this is a lengthy chapter. See, the Alter Rebbe is very articulate in explaining every single midah in the relationship of Yid with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with Hashem. I believe this is the 11th class. I think this is a record. That many classes on one chapter. In this case, on a chapter, it's a fully Geras, a letter, an epistle of the Alter Rebbe. But again, it's one epistle we're holding in the 11th class because again, it's lengthy. As the Alter Rebbe very much, really takes so much of his writing over here to explain every single midah, which he spoke about myriads of times, the 7 midas, but never focused in on each one separately with such detail and dissection like he does over here in this chapter. Why is this chapter, this letter is extremely unique because it gives perspective to these 10 sfiras. Whenever you learn about it now, now I have some better understanding what Haid is, what the midah of Netzach is. We know Netzach is about victory, but how it fits into our Avodas Hashem, the phenomenon of Netzach and Haid, as the Alter Rebbe begins this as an example before he separates the message of Netzach and then separately the message of Haid, the whole phenomenon of Netzach Haid as a group. What does that mean? Now I know what it means because I learned it in Pedic, in the Igeres Tezvav, the 15th Igeres of the Alter Rebbe. And so too, the previous, the Chesed, the Gvura Tiferes, how they all contribute into my relationship, my deep, profound relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with Hashem. So we went the last we concluded was Haid, and now what comes after Haid? That's right, Yisoid. Yisoid, and then would be Malchus. What is Yisoid? So I'll explain us what Yisoid is in the mashal, in the parable the Alter Rebbe gives, in the example the Alter Rebbe gives previously. That Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nהיה b'dvari. What does Alter Rebbe say there, as you remember? And this, again, it's a quick way. I would say maybe it's the 7th. I wouldn't remember to. Well, you just can see it. Follow the text. You'll see where it is in the mashal, in the example that Alter Rebbe gives. I believe perhaps maybe the 5th or 6th class. Alter Rebbe says that a teacher, and again, the example Alter Rebbe gives is a teacher and a disciple and a student. So this teacher was trying to convey the message to the student. He has to really connect with the student. Usually we mentioned that it's that eye-to-eye connection, which usually allows that deeper connection to unfold. The eyes lock in. But again, eyes lock in is the external veneer. The main thing is there's a very personal energy which is coming from the giver to the recipient. And the same information which the master is trying to give over to his pupil, that he would literally, the same words that he would use as he's learning for himself, and he would the student would walk into the room, hear the information, because he's learning it thoroughly, in other words, very explicitly, with much explanation, but he's learning for himself, by himself, for himself. The student would maybe pick up tidbits, different pieces of the study, but there wouldn't be a true absorption, a klita, absorption of the information the way it's meant to be in the context of the transmission of information from a master to his student, to his pupil, from the teacher to his student, as opposed to when the student's sitting face to face with his master. And there's a real deep connection. For that matter, Yisoid, in the original context, when you say the generic concept of Yisoid, that is about the connection on intimate levels. That's what Yisoid is all about, of course. But in this case of transmitting information, in context, of course, it's intimate, of course, in context, that it's not just passing on information cavalier in a cavalier manner. I'm just learning, and maybe learning the matter of the Gemara, let's say, thoroughly, and explaining it to myself thoroughly, but there's no connection with his pupil, there's no connection with the student. He just happens to be in the room. So he'll pick up, of course, bits and pieces, but he won't understand it, he won't absorb the message as a proper student. Did I change the wordage? No, I didn't. I used the exact same words. But in this case, we locked in our eyes, and there is a very deep connection between the master and the student, and that way, this which I transmit really enters, the concept, the insight that I'm transmitting really enters profoundly, deeply into the mind and consciousness of the student. And that is the midah of Yisayid. Again, we're saying this succinctly over here, but you can see it in the mashal, a few classes behind. So the Rebbe says, in the same thing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. B'chein b'midas, we're holding, it's about 246, about 8 lines from the bottom of 246. B'chein b'midas tzadik Yisayid Eilam. In the midah of Yisayid, which would be called tzadik Yisayid Eilam, it's a famous saying, the Gemara brings it as well, that tzadik is the foundation of the world. It's foundational, his presence is foundational, it's deep, and the world stands on the merits of the tzaddik, which again demonstrates the depth of the contribution of the tzaddik to the standing of the world. So the Alter Rebbe used the Lashon tzaddik Yisayid Eilam, of course focusing on the midah of Yisayid. How is it in my Avodas Hashem? How is it in my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That my soul should be connected, tied to Hashem, Chaya Chaim, this life of all lives, the source of life, and to adhere, to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'dveika b'chasheka, with an adherence and a desire, b'cheshek v'tainug nifla, with an aspiration and a pleasurable and delightful and awesomely, nifla means to say a wondrous type of deep pleasure and excitement in my Avodas Hashem. And the difference is, of course, obvious. You see a yid, for example, in davening, he's saying the same words, maybe the same shakel, if it's relevant or not, the shakel. Sometimes it's natural, but there's no passion to his davening. And you want to make a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Is that how you relate to another party, that the other party should be able to react in the same fashion, with the same passion to you, and be excited to fulfill what you're asking? Of course not. If you want to ask somebody a favor and you just put on a tape recorder, I say the tape recorder is the good old tape recorder, but you put something on, can I ask you for a loan for $30,000 as an example? Yeah, maybe that would trigger the other party to do it, but if you come in and you establish a connection with the other party, and the conversation warms up and you kind of confide a bit what's going on and why you're there, and I need $30,000. There's a certain energy in that request. Of course, the chances of the other party is capable of doing so. Well, understandably so. You're approaching the right party. If they are, of course, they will react in a very distinct and total different manner, positively different manner, because it wasn't just a robotic connection. It was deep, it was passionate one way or another. Anyway, you use the word passion, in this case, there was a warm conversation between both of you. And so too, in the relationship of a Yid with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it ought to be a passionate relationship. It ought to be a pleasurable relationship. Synonymous with that phenomenon of Yisayid. The true connection is the passionate connection, and the passionate connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so distinct, and the difference is so stark. A person learns Torah, or to do a mitzvah, the lulav and Esther again, yeah, that should establish some excitement. You did it a long year ago. Oh, it's lulav and Esther. You make the bracha, and you're going to do it perfectly with the right nanuim and everything. But someone looks at you, okay, it's not, you're reluctant to do it. You're okay to do it, and you're doing it. You're doing the mitzvah. You get the check, or you're checked off one way or another. Even though we know the whole phenomenon of passion is not just a noble idea of how to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem Himself wants, Al Rebbe famously has in Perek Lamed Ches of Lukuti Amorim, which is the first segment, the 38th chapter. These are the passion, the excitement. Hashem also wants it, not only the mitzvah itself, which is, of course, namely what Hashem wants. This is Eilam HaMaisa, world of action. That's what Hashem wants. The significant majority of our mitzvahs, given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, described in the Torah, is about action. HaMaisa Hu HaIkar. But nonetheless, Hashem Himself wants our excitement, our love and fear, and so on. Besides the fact that it's a mitzvah in Torah. Hashem, your God, you should fear. Fear the context, of course, of reverence, awe and reverence. And so to all the other midos. Hashem wants this passion. Hashem wants this Yesod type of relationship with Him. Of course, Hashem. He wants it also. But we could also appreciate it on the simple level that we want to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We understand the stark difference and distinct difference between serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu robotically or serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu with excitement, passion, delight, and pleasure. That's the midah of Yesod and Avodas Hashem. Person learns Torah with excitement. Davening would be a classic example. You stand like a robot and you daven, and a little shuckle, or you really get excited about your davening. Baruch Atah Hashem, it's a total different type of relationship. And you could even say from one extreme to the other. This will have production of positive production, true love and fear and excitement, and it would carry throughout the entire day. How a person looks at Elam Haza as a surrounding, at his mandate, his mission, as another yid, another passion, another individual. The world in its entirety, what it's all about, feels a little more the energy of Elokus, of God, the godly energy, which constantly is Mahava, Machayim, Mekayim, creation, constantly gives existence, life and light into creation. A life force into creation. You look at everything so different because you had a Geshmak davening, because you connected intimately with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the godly reality remains throughout the entire day. It produces true divine productions associated with your connection, your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're learning Torah, you feel the urge to learn the Blad Gemara, the few Blad Gemara, to be ma'ayin more in a Rashi, a Taisus, a Rishon, an Acher, and so on. You get excited because you came across with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that morning in your prayers passionately. Your mitzvah, you're seeing another yid, understanding, appreciating the needs of another yid, the way you respond, the choice of words, how much you're ready to spend for a mitzvah. There's this excitement happening. There's the difference of an exciting davening and not exciting davening. A passive davening is astronomical. The difference is grand and great and stark, as we can only all appreciate. And that's the midah of Yesod in relation to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, the Rebbe says quite briefly over here, but nonetheless, it's loaded. Tainug nifla, a great pleasure in the service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the cleaving, the adhering to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so on. And from here, the Alter Rebbe goes on to Malchus, the midas HaMalchus. Malchus means kingdom. When we think about Malchus, we know Hashem is the Melech, Malchei HaMelech HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's not our buddy. He's our king. And we are his subjects. And of course, the different levels of relationship with Yidro with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say in the famous prayer, Im Kibonim, Kabonim, children or servants. We're subjects. There's the Ish v'Isha, the marriage of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Am Yisrael would be the wife, HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the husband. There's different ways of in the relationship, but Hashem himself established. And there's different times, the way we relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, based on these different types of relationship which exist within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we always have to remember that the Rebbe makes it fundamental part and basis in Avodas Hashem. You see it in the 41st chapter of Likutei Amarim. It's worthwhile to see the famous, I would even say, 41st chapter of Likutei Amarim. He said, before we even enter any other type of dimension of relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a father and son, which that's quite a close relationship, and even servant and master. Sometimes there's a certain calling from the servant to the master and try to elicit a certain attention and based on their vulnerability and a certain giving and a certain extending, the master extending himself, or the Gevirta extending herself to the Shivcha, to the maid, or the Eved, or to the servant, because of their vulnerability. And we have that within HaKadosh Baruch Hu, im kibonim im kavadim. Of course, Avadim is usually about that submissiveness of the Eved to his Adin, but nonetheless, there is a certain unique relationship between the Eved and the Ani, because of the, one way or another, constant, perhaps even, vulnerability of the Eved, of the servant, or the shivcha, of the maid, maidser. That there is, but in the overall, the Alter Rebbe says, in any way you want to establish your relationship, or you utilize that type of relationship, again, established by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. It's not man-made. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you find it in Torah. The idea that Eibishter is an Ab and a Ben, Yidner called B'ni B'chayri Yisrael. Together with that, there's the Leisha Avdi, the Avdus, servitude. And there's the Ish V'Isha, famously presented by Shlomo Melech and Shir HaShirim, as an example. But Alter Rebbe makes it clear, before anything, you got to know, Hashem is Melech Malchem Malchem Malchem. Hashem is your king, the king of all kings. He's not your just body of you. And therefore, first and foremost, we have to know everything we do, even when we look for the relationship, which is more of a passionate type of relationship, we have to know that it ought to be predicated on that unique relationship which exists between subject and the king, and particularly when you're talking about Melech Malchem Malchem HaKadosh, the king of all kings, which knows, Alter Rebbe says, it's not something you can hide from. To say, I'm just on the other side of the country, the king is in his palace, maybe he'll find out tomorrow, next week, in a year, if I'm not behaving exactly the way I meant to, not aligning myself with his desires, the way the country should be run, maybe he'll find out, maybe he won't even find out forever. Alter Rebbe, when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he sees everything at all times. And he examines the heart and intestines, again, Lashon of the Alter Rebbe. And Nitzav Allah, he's standing over you, and he cares, he, capital H, of course, cares what you're going to do, think, speak in the next second. And therefore we have to realize that, whoa, this is a different idea. This is about a Melech, Melech Malchem Malchem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we have to demonstrate that underlying subordination, like subject to king. And then, based on that, then you could build up and then entertain the other relationships with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Is the message of the Alter Rebbe in the beginning of Perik Malach, and here the Alter Rebbe says it as well. When you deal with Malchus, with Midas, Malchus, in the midah of Malchus with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's lekabel olav el Malchusay, to accept upon oneself the yoke of the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the yoke of the kingdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'avodasei, and his service, k'avodas kol eved ladonai, like the service of every servant to his master, be'emo v'yira, with awe and fear. And why does Alter Rebbe change from Melech to Odoin? There is a difference between subject and king and servant to a master. Even the relationship is distinct, one way or another. But nonetheless, Alter Rebbe jumps Eved Ladoni for one reason. First of all, we know a Melech is the true master. When you want to compare the closest, the relationship with all different types of relationship that exist with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael, what would you compare? What would be the closest to Melech? Of course, the Adin, the master. It's not Av, it's not father, not husband. It's Adin, because that's what a Melech predominantly has his Adnos, his superiority, his master, being a master. But nonetheless, it is distinct. So why did Alter Rebbe jump Eved Ladon? And the simple reason is because not always does the people of belonging to, again, a country led by this king. Today we don't have this phenomenon of king, this type of monarch image as a king. We don't have it. So it's not common in Western society, and perhaps for good reasons. Very rare to have a king which was genuine. Even in Jewish history, we find that there was the genuine, those who carried and understood their message and mandate throughout their entire tenure, because power hits the head very quickly, especially in the outside world. And it was rare to find the king which would begin his tenure till the end of his tenure in a proper manner. So we don't have it set up again, perhaps maybe in a positively, but nonetheless, there is even when there was the phenomenon of the monarch and the image of the king and the entire country were they're practically the subjects of the king, but you didn't find it that common in their relationship on a constant daily basis. Periodically, they came in front of the king. They were very careful because they knew they were the subject of the king, but it wasn't frequent. They didn't meet the king frequently. It's the famous, famous Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, Anila Deidi, in L'Kutei Torah, is Melech Basada. That's why what is so unique about Chodesh Elul, that the king comes to the field and he becomes approachable by every single human being, and even the peasants and the farmers working on the field. That's why Chodesh Elul is extremely unique. You're able to meet up with the king, which is a rarity in normal times. Service of a servant to a master is common. And again, even this is not common today, the generic type of avdus, but again, you see it, there's a room for it in Torah. And to reconcile quickly, how does Tanya speak about Avdus? Yeah, total different idea. Someone knows a little bit of Avdus in Tanya about how Tanya speaks about the service, the service of the servant to his master, or the relationship between the servant and the master, knows that it's very distinct. Is this which is conventionally known as the slave or servant, which was again X'd out, meaning to say was cancelled. For rightfully so, because people did not treat their slaves and servants in a proper way, and quite the opposite to the extreme. If you look a little bit, you tap into the Eved Odin, the way Torah prescribes it, you see a total different picture. It says, for that matter, that the Odin, the master, someone is subjugated one way or another to his servant. He cannot sit down and eat a meal before his servant. For that matter, Torah even says, feed your animal before you sit down to eat. Make sure that your servant has this more so. When it comes to your servant, make sure that he's eating the same stuff you're eating. And not that you should have it before him. To the contrary, it should be the same stuff. And if you like a good pillow, you make sure he has that same pillow. You like a good blanket, you make sure he has a good blanket. It's a different, diametrically opposite that we appreciate the slave-master phenomenon in commonly known. So just to understand, when Torah speaks about, famously beginning Parshat Mishpatim, and later on this becomes one of the mitzvahs in Torah, Eved Ivri, B'chal Eved. There's a difference, maybe there is a difference between, but nonetheless, Torah demonstrates such sensitivity to that very Eved. So back to what we're saying over here is, it was much more common, the phenomenon of Eved to a master, together with the master having that unique type of relationship, constantly appreciating, a proper master that is, constantly appreciating the vulnerability of the servant or the maidservant, and providing for them what they need, and being sensitive to them, as the famous Alter Rebbe, the Rambam, when he speaks in the end of Avodim, such beautiful, precious words. You see it in the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, how he spoke about, he quotes a pasuk of Eiv, and saying that the demonstration of compassion and mercy to every human being, even your servant or your maidservant, to demonstrate the ultimate maximum sensitivity, because it's another human being. It's extraordinary, the approach of Torah to the phenomenon of Eved or Shivcha to their master or Gevirta. Nonetheless, that's from the perspective of the master. But from the perspective of the servant, a proper servant has to conduct themselves, or a shivcha or a maidservant, they do conduct themselves in a very careful manner in their servitude to their master. They make sure everything is ready and on time and everything is clean. They fulfill their mandate usually 100%, usually. Because they know who they are. They know that they are part of a system now that they must demonstrate their constant focus on their master or on the geveres of the home. And so to the maidservant. And they act accordingly. And as the famous memorim of the Rebbe Rashab in Tafresh Samach Vav, famous discourse, a hemshech, in which the Rebbe Rashab points out, dafka from the Eved, a Yid could excel, or a Yid could glean proper energy in his relationship with his Creator, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Precisely from that interest in the Eved to always do it right, to do it precisely right, never laid back. His pleasure is when his master has pleasure, and he tries to perfect it all the time. It's incredible, my morim. It's worth to even invest in taking that Tafresh Samach Vav. That's why the sefer is called, of the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, and he has the Maimer begins with Mikne Rab, which is in Chumash Dvarim, of course. Then he has the two, the Eved Nemo and the Eved Pashut, even it divides different type of Avadim, but the common denominator, there's a certain pleasure and a delight when the Eved, knowing that it's about his submissiveness, constant submissiveness to his master, his constant level, state of subordination to his master. He knows he's an Eved. So from the perspective of the master, of course, he's provided all the time what he needs and beyond, especially from the perspective of Torah. But from his or her perspective, they do everything in their power to demonstrate their pleasure in their service to the master, their master. And the more the master has the pleasure, the more they try to do it even better. In other words, to gain and to demonstrate more delight in their service. A delight which is underlined with a constant submission, a constant state of subordination to their master. They know their state. They are servants and they're there not as an employee, but one who is constantly there for their master, or the giveres habayis, and that would be the servant or the maidservant. So, because it was much more common practice of the phenomenon of Avdus Adin, so therefore, the Alter Rebbe, when he speaks about Malchus, HaKadosh Baruch Hu being the king of all kings, and then us being the subject, which we understand the subject to a king is different than the Abdus Ladeni, but there is something on the surface. There is a common thread between them, just on the surface, as you can appreciate both. They're both about bittul, subservience to a hierarchy. In this case, it's the master, and in the overall, when we talk about the king, it's much deeper. For that matter, not only it's much deeper, one has to be a bit more careful. Like the Gemara says, there's usually could be even opposite. The consequence could be an opposite in life, even in perspective of halacha. In front of a king, you have to be not only respectful, you have to be very careful not to do even the smallest gesture, which would perhaps compromise the honor of the king. So, of course, it's much deeper, that bittul, self-abnegation of the subject to the king than the servant to his master. But Alter Rebbe jumps right away, because this is something more common and this is frequent. The master, the subject, the servant is constantly on duty, 24/7 to the service of his master. That is greater, much more, that is tantamount to the avodah of the Yid, knowing that we're 24 hours on guard. And we have to remember Hashem is a melech. And of course, he's an Odain, he's a master, and beyond that, he's a Melech. And we have to be careful, and we have to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as he says over here, to accept, the first thing to accept, the Oil Malchusai, not only the oil of the Adnos, but the oil, the yoke of Hashem's Malchus, known as Kabbalah's Oil Malchus Shamayim, accepting the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kablu Malchusi, v'achar kach kablu Zerei. So first you accept that Hashem is your king, and then you accept the edicts, the decrees of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For that matter, the Gemara says, we say Shema, B'hayim Shemaya. They're not adjacent in the Torah, but the Gemara says, why did we begin with Shema before B'hayim Shemaya Tishmal Kol El Mitzvah? We're talking about adhering to the mitzvahs of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to do them properly and perfectly. Why do we need the Shema before? So the Gemara says, first, we're mekabel olam aleinu ol machal shamayim. We accept upon ourselves the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And then we can go on to the details of Hashem's edicts and decrees, El Meim Shema Tishma, El Mitzvah, the specific mitzvahs. And that's what Hashem says even by Rosh Hashanah, Kabel Malchusi, Ve'achar Kabel Gzereisa. That's the whole point of Rosh Hashanah, to accept HaKadosh Baruch Hu's reign. He's our king. He's our Melech, Malchei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which that approach is, of course, distinct, and it comes across, it expresses itself in every single tenu and every movement of the Yid. Even when I want to do good, even when I want to do a mitzvah, but if it's missing the Kabbalah's oil, if it's missing the acceptance of the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or establishing the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu upon myself, first of all, we will never be as careful, we'll never be scrupulous, we'll never be even careful. Today I'm in the mood, tomorrow I'm not in the mood. Today I'll do it mediocrely. Tomorrow hopefully I'll do it better, or maybe tomorrow I won't do it at all. Wait till 2 days from now. And namely when it comes to leisesa, when Hashem says do not do, which becomes a greater challenge, particularly when you're dealing with the more nuanced or subtle koiches, functions within the human being, guarding one's eyes, one's mind, one's even talk. One has to be extremely careful. So if it wasn't with the anchoring my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Kabbalah Seil, accepting the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I probably wouldn't even be careful. And more so, even if I would do everything, there is going to always be lacking in that relationship with me and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it's about when I'm comfortable to do it, when I feel good about it. No, our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not about us. The whole point of the connection is remove ourselves from the equation, from the space, and say, no, it's about you, Hashem, and accept upon yourself the oilma, the yoke of your reign, your kingdom. And based on that, I start even establishing my other types of relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well, even that Ishri Isha or the Ben and Av. That way Yid can know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is his dear, loving Father. All that is true, and all that has to be practiced as well, and does unfold in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And sometimes it unfolds in every single day. And it's meant to. A Yid davens to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as an example. It's more that beseeching a father, a merciful father, he should acquiesce to this which I'm asking for. So all these relationships are true, and they're meant to express themselves in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it all has to be predicated and based on the fact that Hashem is our master. Hashem is Melech, Malchei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's not our buddy. He is our king, and we have to adhere to him 100%. This is the midah of Malchus in our Avodas Hashem. And to read it again, L'kabel olav Malchusay, to accept the yoke of Hashem's reign. Avidasi in his servant. Kavodas kol eved la'adeinei, like the service of every servant to his master, the aim of yira, with awe and fear. So with this we conclude all the 7 midas in our Avodas Hashem, from Chesed all the way to Malchus. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Yisay, Malchus. And just before we conclude over here, just like then, when in the mashal, an example, he pointed out in the connection, the relationship with the master and the teacher, that is, and his pupil, and going through as well these midas, and again, as the mashal, as the example, as the metaphor. And he continues, he says that all these midas in the end of the day are produced through the Chabad, through the Chochma Bina Das. That's the way it works. What we understand and perceive, that's what we follow. That itself produces these 7 midas. The Alter Rebbe writes it in the beginning of Peri Gimel. We had a little presentation on that, the very first page of Peri Gimel. You could see it. It's a click away. The 3rd chapter of the first segment. This is the 4th. The first segment, which is Lukuti Amorim. The Alter Rebbe points out how the midas are Toldes Chabad. They're the offspring, and we can understand it easily, what you understand and perceive. And namely, you understand it with a level of das. The Alter Rebbe explains das in the very end of that chapter. That's the way these midas are born. I understand that this is good, so eventually that causes that that excitement, enthusiasm to gravitate towards it. And if it's something which brings concern, there's more daiga, yira, or awe, or fear, reverence. These are all productions of my chokhmah bina das, my cognitive, my understanding, and my appreciation, my perception, and with my cognitive faculties. So too, the Alter Rebbe is going to continue, as we remember Hashem this coming week, in the Nimshal, the Alter Rebbe points this out as well. The source and the root of all these midas, and mechabad, comes from chokhmah bina das, as we'll look forward learning this further. Bez Hashem this coming week. Have a wonderful night.